Okay, so I'm going to talk about the research and what it found in terms of effective teaching strategies, and I'm going to speak to two that I found intriguing before I talk about the neuroscience that we learned about this week. So, when I read the research about elaborative interrogation, I was very reflective about my own practice as a special education teacher. I often use guided inquiry in my lessons because I found that it allows me to scaffold my questions so that even the students that are at a lower level cognitively can at least answer what questions to improve their confidence so that they will continue to try with the learning. Prior to my arrival at this school, many of the students were very passive learners. They were sat in front of a computer and told to work on computer programs that were to help improve their reading and math levels, but they were generally working on games without much supervision. So I had a lot of pushback my first year, but towards the end of the year, I really saw some progress in terms of the kids taking more of an active interest in their own learning and in stretching themselves to answer those questions about why things occur in history. I taught social studies and science that year. And in terms of pushing themselves a little harder so that they were actually part of their learning process. So I found it interesting that they only found that to be moderately effective and that they just felt like it wasn't easily measured. And it isn't easily measured because it really depends on the teacher and how well the questions are posed to the students and the teacher's reaction to the students even when they answer something incorrectly. So when my students answer something incorrectly, I always give them praise for trying. I actually give them merit points for trying. And then we move forward and I explain why give some other people opportunities to participate, and then I give the correct answer and we talk about why that's the correct answer. So I think it really has to do with a follow-up. How you follow up those questions really makes it what is an effective or ineffective strategy. So there are some teachers that probably are not comfortable or would not be very successful with that strategy, but in my experience, I found it to be very helpful with my kids because, again, they've been sitting kind of passive in their learning up until they hit me, and then it kind of requires them to start thinking on their own. The other thing that I found that was really interesting was the practice testing is what they called it. They said it was a high utility strategy. And it's interesting because last year we started a process where we break up the Common Core standards into 5 different units. Each unit has 5 standards that the students focus on, and at the end of each unit they take a 25-question test, 5 questions on each standard, and then we measure how well they did on that unit test. The unit tests are very aligned to the state testing. They're worded exactly the same as what they're going to encounter on the state tests. And a lot of us balked at this. Some of us got some growth last year in terms of our state scores, but some of us didn't. And I think after reading the research on this, it was very interesting to me that it was found to be effective. It's interesting too because they've actually requested that we start giving the students exposure to questions that will be on the unit test, either using different wording especially or using different numbers for math, using different words for the language arts, but still addressing those standards, and give them exposure to how the questions will be answered. And they want us to do it as kind of like a think, pair, share strategy where the students pair up, they look at the question, they read it together, they determine what the question is asking, and then they have to give the correct answer and explain why that's the correct answer. And a lot of us don't want to take the time to do this strategy because it takes up time from direct instruction, and because a lot of our students struggle with that talking about academics. So even though we give them the sentence frames to use, they will pair up and just have their middle school drama conversations. But after reading this made me kind of want to try the strategy just in a whole class setting. And for me, it's a little easier since my maximum class I think I have is 11 in my language arts classes. So I think it's something that I will try to see if I get some growth on my unit test. Finally, the neuroscience for me was really, and I know I put this in my discussion post, it was very frustrating to read for me this week because so many of my students have fetal alcohol syndrome, ADHD, reading disabilities, and speech and language issues. So their brain is not a typical brain. So to be reading about how their connections should be working versus what I'm seeing in the classroom, it's more of a fuzzy notion to me in terms of how the brain works for my kids. So I was looking at brain scans just now about how a typical brain scan looks compared to a brain affected by alcohol, and there's just so much less brain matter there just in general, and it's arranged differently, and so to me it was very frustrating this week to read that and then be given tips that had to do with that sort of neuroscience, because to me I can't apply that in my practice because those aren't necessarily things that will work in my classroom. So all in all, I got some really good things out of this week, especially these last articles. I did find the book to be frustrating to read. I'm sorry to report. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, but I did find it frustrating because my kids really suffer out here. Not only are they victims of fetal alcohol syndrome and learning disabilities, but they're also victims of poverty. So they're experiencing trauma that also affects their brain. So I wish that had been addressed in this book. And hopefully it's something, I know it's going to come up because that's what my focus is in this master's program, but I just wanted to give you my perspective on that, okay? So that's it. Thank you.